Have you ever been writing an email maybe or telling a story or just, trying to explain something? And you know the general idea of the words you need, but there are like two, three, maybe even more words that seem incredibly similar.
Oh, absolutely.
Like, are they interchangeable? Is there some subtle difference? And if there is, what is it?
Hmm.
Finding just the right word can feel surprisingly tricky, almost like trying to pick the perfect shade from a whole palette of colors that look nearly identical, at first glance anyway.
It happens all the time. English, like many languages, is wonderfully rich, and this richness often comes in these clusters of words, synonyms that sort of orbit a central meaning.
Right.
They might seem alike on the surface, but they frequently carry distinct shades of meaning or context or connotation. Think of it less like picking from identical colors and maybe more like choosing the right brushstroke. That slight variation makes a big difference to the final picture.
That's exactly where our deep dive takes us today. We're plunging into the fascinating world of language nuance, specifically exploring these subtle differences among synonyms and even some antonyms to really sharpen our understanding and our guide. A
Hmm.
classic, reliable source that's spent centuries charting these linguistic seas, Webster's dictionary. We're looking at a particular section, digging into entries from the word random all the way through sacred.
That's right. Our mission today is, well, it's to unpack these subtle distinctions, to peer into the microscopic differences that give each word its unique power. It's much more than just memorizing definitions. It's about truly understanding the feel of the word, the specific context where it fits best, and why choosing one word over another matters. It's about appreciating the precision that's, available to us in language.
Think of it as sharpening your toolkit for clearer thought and, well, more effective communication. We've pulled the most insightful nuggets of knowledge from this specific section of Webster's to give you a shortcut, a way to become better informed about the incredible precision that language allows if we only pay attention. We're going to explore these words not just as a list, but by grouping them conceptually to see how different shades of meaning sort of cluster together. Ready to jump in?
Absolutely. Let's start our exploration in the realm of chance and things that happen without a clear plan or system. Webster's gives us a group here. Random, haphazard, chance, casual, desultory, and hit or miss. These all describe things determined by accident rather than deliberate design, but they aren't quite the same.
Okay, so random. That's the one we probably encounter most often in everyday conversation from this group, I think. What's its core meaning according to Webster's?
So random stresses pure chance and a lack of definite aim, a fixed goal, or regular procedure. When something is truly random, there's no underlying pattern or intention guiding its selection or occurrence. The source gives the example of a random sampling of public opinion. The intention there is that the selection process itself has no specific plan or bias. It's purely left to chance to represent the population unbiasedly. The antonym here is purposive.
So pure chance, no specific guiding hand or method. That's helpful. How does haphazard differ then?
Well, haphazard takes the idea of lack of plan a bit further, applying it more to things done without regard for regularity, fitness, or ultimate consequence. While random often describes an outcome or a selection process based purely on chance, haphazard frequently describes the manner in which something is done in a disorderly, maybe careless way.
Ah, okay.
The source uses the example of a haphazard selection of college courses. You weren't necessarily trying to be random, like picking names from a hat. You just picked without considering how they fit together for a major or future career. There was a lack of order and care in the process of selection.
Ah, I see. So random is about the outcome or lack of method in the system, maybe, while haphazard is more about a careless, disorderly approach to doing something. What about chance?
Chance focuses more specifically on what comes or happens to you, or is done or made, without prearrangement, foreknowledge, or preparation. This highlights the lack of intent or planning on the part of the person experiencing or creating the event. The event itself wasn't planned by anyone involved, you see.
Okay.
Think of a chance encounter with an old friend on the street, or maybe making a chance acquaintance while traveling. It just happened to you, without your prior knowledge or planning.
Got it. It emphasizes the unplanned nature from the perspective of the individual experiencing or causing the event. How does casual fit into this mix then?
Casual suggests a deliberate posture of leaving things to chance and acting without deliberation, intention, or purpose. Unlike haphazard, which can imply carelessness, casual implies a sort of relaxed lack of serious thought or planning. You're not striving for a specific goal or following a strict itinerary. You're comfortable letting things unfold without intense focus.
Hmm.
Taking a casual tour of the sites, as the source suggests, is a great example. You're just wandering without much specific purpose or a rigid plan. Its antonym is deliberate.
So casual is like a relaxed, purposeful lack of planning almost. What about desultory? That sounds a bit more negative, perhaps like skipping around.
It does, yeah. Desultory paints a picture of jumping or skipping from one thing to another without method or system. This leads to inconsistent performance and lack of continuity. It describes actions or efforts that are scattered and lack coherence.
Right.
The source gives a desultory discussion. It leaps between unrelated topics without flow or structure. It implies a lack of focus, system, and consistency in the execution. The antonym, interestingly, is assiduous, which implies focused, persistent diligence.
Ah, so desultory is about the scattered, inconsistent nature of the action or effort, not necessarily accidental, but definitely lacking structure. And finally, hit or miss.
Hit or miss is often considered the most extreme on this spectrum. It applies when something is so haphazard that it lacks all apparent plan, aim, system, or care. It suggests a complete lack of organization, making the outcome unpredictable and likely unreliable or inefficient. The source calls it a real hit-or-miss operation. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't, seemingly without any discernible reason or system. There's no confidence you can achieve a consistent outcome.
Wow, that's a fantastic breakdown. So you can move from something purely based on chance, random, to a careless way of doing things, haphazard, hit or miss, to things that just happen to you unplanned chance, to a deliberate lack of plan, casual, to an inconsistent, scattered approach, desultory.
Why does understanding these subtle differences matter for us in our daily communication?
It matters immensely because it allows you to describe not just the general randomness or lack of order, but the specific flavor of it, Are you describing a truly unbiased process, random, careless execution, haphazard, a fortunate accident, chance, a relaxed approach, casual, a lack of focus, desultory, or total disorganization, hit or miss?
Yeah.
Choosing the right word gives your description a layer of precision and nuance that a general term like random or unplanned simply can't capture. It helps you articulate the nature of the aimlessness. That really makes you think about the underlying reason for the lack of plan or order. It's not all the same. Now that we've clarified how we talk about things happening or being done without a clear system, let's shift gears to something equally fundamental, describing space and boundaries. We're looking at words that describe the extent that lies within the powers of something to cover or control. Range, the noun, gamut, compass, sweep, scope, reach, also the noun, and orbit. These are all about extent, but, well, differently.
Let's start with range, which is perhaps the most common. Webster's calls range a general term for extent, whether it refers to one's perception, powers, capabilities, or possibilities. It's about the full scale or continuum of something. The source uses the entire range of human experience, the full scale of what humans can perceive, do, or imagine from one end of the spectrum to the other.
Okay, range is the broad general extent, and gamut. I usually hear that in phrases like, ran the gamut of emotions.
Precisely. Gamut suggests a graduated series running from one possible extreme to another. It specifically highlights the coverage of a full spectrum, moving through distinct points from one boundary to its opposite. The source uses the example of a performance that ran the gamut of emotions, hitting every point from intense joy to deep despair. It implies traversing the entire scale.
So range is the total area or scale, and the gamut is specifically traversing or covering the full spectrum from extreme to extreme. How about compass?
Compass implies a sometimes limited or bounded extent of perception, knowledge, or activity. It suggests boundaries, often ones that are perceived as narrow or constrained. The source uses the example of concerns that lie beyond the narrow compass of a study. The compass defines the limits of what is included or capable of being addressed.
That's a helpful distinction. It's not just extent, but a bounded, often limited extent. What does sweep bring to this group?
Sweep suggests extent, often circular or arc-shaped, of motion or activity. It implies a broad, continuous movement that covers an area, like the movement of a hand sweeping across a table or, figuratively, across time or subject matter.
Right.
Think of a book that covers the entire sweep of criminal activity through history. It covers a wide arc of time and events in a broad, continuous flow.
Okay, so sweep adds the idea of broad, continuous movement across an area or time. And scope.
Scope is applicable to a predetermined and limited area of activity that is somewhat flexible within those limits. It suggests defined boundaries, like the scope of an investigation or a project, but those boundaries are not necessarily rigid and can sometimes be adjusted or widened as needed. The source notes this flexibility. It's a defined area of operation that isn't fixed in stone.
So scope is a bounded area, but with some potential for adjustment. And reach as a noun.
Reach refers to an extent of activity attained to or experienced by stretching out. It implies the limit of one's ability to extend, whether physically and metaphorically or in terms of influence. A goal well within reach is one you can attain by extending your efforts, as the source example shows. It's about the limit of your grasp or capability, often implying something is achievable or inaccessible.
That makes sense, like the physical act of reaching, defining the extent of your grasp. Finally, orbit.
Orbit suggests an often circumscribed range of activity or influence within which forces work toward accommodation. This word evokes the image of a planet orbiting a star, a defined sphere of influence where interactions occur and things find their place relative to a central force or element.
Interesting.
The source gives the example of trying to affect social change within a restricted orbit. You're working within a limited, defined sphere of influence where certain forces are at play and accommodations must be made.
That's interesting. It adds the idea of a defined sphere where specific forces operate. So to recap, we have general extent, range, full spectrum coverage, gamut, limited bounded area, compass, broad movement across an area, sweep, flexible limited area scope, limit of grasp capability, reach, and a circumscribed sphere of influence, orbit. Why is it important to use the right word here?
Choosing the right word allows you to specify not just the general extent of something, but what kind of extent it is and what that implies. Are you talking about the full-scale range, traversal of a spectrum, a constraint, compass, a broad sweeping view, sweep, a defined but flexible area of work, scope, what's achievable within one's grasp, reach, or a limited sphere of influence where specific forces interact, orbit.
Right.
Each word provides a more precise picture of the nature of that extent, giving crucial context.
Right, it moves beyond just how much to what kind of boundary, space, or movement.
Oh.
Speaking of defined amounts, sometimes what we get is limited, whether it's resources or something more abstract. This brings us to words about amounts that are allotted, ration, allowance, and pittance.
These terms describe amounts of things, often limited, that are given out or available. Ration implies apportionment and often equal sharing. Originally used for a daily food supply, it's extended to anything in short supply made available equally or equitably based on need.
Okay.
The source mentions gasoline rations in wartime varying with individual needs, showing it can be equitable based on criteria like need, not just strictly equal amounts for everyone.
The ration is about dividing up a limited supply, often fairly based on need or apportionment.
Exactly. Allowance, on the other hand, stresses granting rather than sharing something restricted. It's a specific amount given from one party to another, often regularly, for a particular purpose or general use. Think of a child's allowance to handle money, or a travel allowance for expenses. It's a grant from one to another, not necessarily a division of a common scarce resource.
Okay, so allowance is a granted amount. What about pittance?
Pittance stresses meagerness or miserliness. It can apply to any of these amounts, a ration, an allowance, a wage, or payment. But its core meaning highlights how small, inadequate, or stingy the amount is perceived to be.
Right.
The source gives the example of managing to survive on a mere pittance wage. It's defined by its insufficiency and often implies a negative judgment about the giver's generosity or the receiver's difficult circumstances.
Yeah. So the distinction is about the method of distribution, ration versus allowance, and the perceived size and adequacy, pittance. Why do we need to know this?
Well, understanding these helps you describe precisely how something limited is being provided, and also maybe inject a subtle judgment. Is something being shared based on need, ration, granted as a set amount by a specific source, allowance, or is the amount simply tiny and inadequate, perhaps frustratingly so, pittance? It adds crucial detail about the context and the perceived value of the amount.
That's clear, and pittance definitely adds an emotional layer. Now that we've talked about allotting things, let's think about how we decide what's fair or makes sense of the world. This brings us to the act of thinking itself, using our minds to understand and evaluate. Websters gives us a few groups related to cognitive processes and applying our intellect. Let's start with reason, understanding, and intuition, which describe different ways the mind attains truth or knowledge.
Okay. So, reason here, as a noun, refers to the faculty for order, sense, and rationality, and thought, inference, and conclusion about perceptions. It's the logical, analytical, step-by-step process of thinking that allows us to draw conclusions and make sense of information. The source gives, tried to approach each problem with calm and reason, highlighting the deliberate application of logical thought.
So reason is the logical, analytical part of the mind and the process of applying logic.
Yes. Understanding may widen the scope of reason to include most thought processes leading to comprehension and also the resultant state of knowledge. It's broader than just the logical steps. It encompasses the entire mental process of grasping something fully and the final state of having knowledge or comprehension about it.
Okay.
The source gives research that led to a new understanding of the disease, referring to both the cognitive process and the achieved state of knowledge.
So understanding is a broader cognitive process encompassing comprehension and the resulting state of knowing and intuition.
Intuition stresses quick knowledge or comprehension without evident, orderly reason, thought, or cogitation. It's the sudden flash of insight, the gut feeling, the seemingly immediate grasp of truth or knowledge that bypasses the logical, step-by-step process we associate with reason. The source uses responded on the basis of intuition, implying a decision made based on this rapid, non-logical insight.
That's the aha moment that doesn't seem to follow a clear logical path. So we have the logical process, reason, the broader comprehension and state of knowing, understanding, and the sudden non-logical insight, intuition. Why distinguish these different modes of knowing?
Recognizing these terms helps us appreciate the different ways our minds work and arrive at conclusions or knowledge. Not everything is a result of careful logical steps, you know?
Yeah.
Sometimes it's a comprehensive grasp built over time, and sometimes it's a sudden flash. Using these words allows us to accurately describe the specific cognitive pathway involved.
That's really insightful. It shows that knowing isn't just one type of mental activity.
Yeah.
Building on how we process information, let's look at how we relate new knowledge to what we already know. Websters gives us recognition, identification, assimilation, and apperception.
Right. Recognition is perhaps the simplest. It implies that the perceived thing has been previously perceived, and the mind is simply aware the two are the same. You know you've encountered this before. The source gives, encouraged by the patient's recognition of his mother, it's the feeling of familiarity, knowing something is not new to you.
So recognition is just knowing you've seen or experienced it before. What about identification?
Identification adds to recognition the implication of prior knowledge that permits one to recognize the thing as an individual member of a class. You don't just know you've seen it, you know what it is, what category it belongs to, based on what you already know about categories and members.
Okay.
The source uses bird calls, aiding in the identification of species. You hear the call, recognize it's a bird, and then based on your knowledge of bird calls, you identify it as a specific species.
So identification is recognizing something and categorizing it based on prior knowledge. How about assimilation?
Assimilation implies a deeper process. It means the mind responds to new ideas, facts, and experiences by interpreting them in the light of what is already known, thereby making them an integral part of one's existing knowledge base. It's not just categorizing. It's fully integrating the new information, modifying your existing understanding to incorporate it seamlessly. The source mentions rapid assimilation of new material, like a student quickly making new facts part of their overall knowledge.
So assimilation is deeply integrating new information into your existing understanding. Your perception.
Apperception. Yeah, this one implies a more fundamental relationship between new and old knowledge. It means the mind responds to new facts, ideas, or situations when and only when it can relate them to what is already known. This suggests that prior knowledge acts as a filter or even a prerequisite for understanding anything new at all. You can only perceive or truly grasp the new information if you have the necessary existing framework to connect it to. The source gives, limited by my apperceptions of reality, suggesting one's understanding of new events is constrained by their existing understanding of how the world works.
That's fascinating, that prior knowledge can be a filter or even a requirement for processing new information. So we have simple familiarity, recognition, recognizing and categorizing identification, fully integrating new information, assimilation, and understanding new things only through the lens of prior knowledge, apperception. Why are these distinctions helpful for describing how we learn?
Well, these words map out different ways we process new information based on what we already know. They describe whether it's just recognizing something familiar, slotting it into a known category, truly integrating it into our worldview, or whether our existing knowledge is a necessary foundation for understanding anything new at all.
Right.
They provide a vocabulary for discussing the complexities of learning and knowledge acquisition.
It really maps out the landscape of how our minds make sense of the world based on our experiences. And thinking about applying our intellect, Webster's gives us two words that sound very similar but have a crucial difference when it comes to evaluation: rational and reasonable.
Ah, yes. This is a key distinction often missed. Rational usually implies the power to make logical inferences and draw conclusions that enable understanding. Applied to things, it stresses satisfactoriness in terms of reason. It's about the capacity for logic, logical thinking, and producing logically sound output.
Yeah.
The source mentions a rational being capable of rational discourse, a person who can think logically and communicate logically. Antonyms include irrational, demented, and absurd.
So rational is about the ability to use logic and the quality of being logically sound or consistent.
Yes. Reasonable, on the other hand, emphasizes the exercise of the faculty of reason in accordance with sense, justice, and fairness, and the avoidance of needless error. It's not just about being logically correct, it's about applying practical judgment guided by common sense, fairness, and practicality in a given situation. The source gives the example of a willingness to grant any reasonable request. A request might be logically consistent, but completely impractical or unfair, thus not reasonable. Its antonym is unreasonable.
Okay, this really clarifies it. You can construct a perfectly logical argument, rational,
Yeah.
that is nonetheless completely unfair, impractical, or insensible in context, unreasonable. The distinction is about logic versus practical, fair judgment.
Exactly. The distinction is crucial in evaluating arguments, decisions, or behavior. A business decision might be rational in purely economic terms, logically sound, but unreasonable if it ignores human impact or ethical considerations.
That really highlights how different those two words are, even though they share a root. Now, the world we try to understand can be harsh, sometimes leading to damage and ruin. Websters provides a significant number of words related to destruction and its results. Let's look at the verbs describing the process of damage first. Ravage, devastate, waste, the verb, sack, pillage, and despoil. They all mean to lay waste by plundering or destroying. Then we can look at the nouns describing the state of ruin.
Okay, let's start with ravage. Ravage implies violent, severe, and often cumulative depredation and destruction. It suggests damage that is brutal, widespread, and often continues over time, or damage from a powerful force. A hurricane that ravaged the Gulf Coast, as the source notes, causes intense, widespread, and lasting damage.
So ravage is violent, severe, and often ongoing destruction. What about devastate?
Devastate implies complete ruin and desolation of a wide area. This is about total, utter destruction on a large scale. The atomic bomb that devastated Hiroshima is the stark example used in the source, illustrating total ruin over a significant area, leaving nothing standing.
That implies a more complete and total destruction than ravage. And waste as a verb.
Waste may imply a less complete destruction or one produced by a slower or less violent process. It can suggest gradual decline, damage, or depletion rather than sudden violent destruction. Years of drought that wasted the area, as the source describes, caused gradual deterioration of the land. Its antonyms are conserve and save.
So waste is less total and potentially slower than ravage or devastate. What about sack?
Sack implies the looting and destroying of a place. This term is strongly associated with military action, conquest, or invasion, where an attacking force captures a place, plunders its wealth, and then often destroys it afterward.
Right.
Barbarians sacked ancient Rome is the classic example provided, involving both taking valuables and causing ruin.
That brings in the element of conquest and looting alongside destruction. How is pillage different from sack?
Pillage implies ruthless plundering at will, but without the completeness suggested by sack. It's about taking things by force, often valuable items, but the destruction isn't necessarily as total or the primary focus as it is in sack.
Okay.
The source mentions settlements pillaged by Vikings they raided and stole, taking valuables by force, but didn't always completely destroy the settlement. Their primary goal was the taking.
Okay, so pillage is focused more purely on the taking of valuables by force, less on the total destruction.
Yeah.
And despoil.
Despoil applies to the looting or robbing of a place or person without suggesting accompanying destruction. This word zeroes in specifically on stripping away valuable things, often in a systematic way, without necessarily causing physical ruin to the location itself. The source example is the Nazis who despoiled the art museums of Europe. There was significant theft of valuable art, but the buildings themselves weren't necessarily destroyed in the process.
That's a very specific type of laying waste,
Right.
just the taking of valuables.
Right.
So why is having all these different verbs for destruction important?
Well, each word specifies a different type, scale, or focus of destruction or taking. You can describe sudden, violent, cumulative damage, ravage, total ruin over a wide area, devastate, gradual decline, waste, violent taking and destroying associated with conquest, sack, ruthless taking without complete destruction, pillage,
Mhm.
or simply robbing without physical destruction, despoil.
Yeah.
This allows for much more precise and evocative descriptions of how damage is done.
That level of detail really paints a different picture depending on the verb chosen. Now, let's look at the nouns that describe the state or result of such disaster. Ruin the noun, havoc, devastation the noun, and destruction noun.
Okay. Ruin noun suggests collapse and is applicable to whatever has given way or fallen apart through decay, corruption, neglect, or loss. It describes the state of decay, dilapidation, or brokenness, often of structures or systems that have collapsed. The source gives, the old house had fallen to ruin, referring to its state of decay and collapse.
So ruin is the state of decay and collapse? What about havoc?
Havoc suggests both an agent that pillages, destroys, or ravages, and importantly, the resulting confusion and disorder. It emphasizes the chaos, disruption, and disarray that results from destruction or disaster. The source gives the havoc left by the earthquake, referring to the scene of disorder and damage left behind.
So havoc is the chaotic result of destruction or disorder. How does devastation as a noun compare to the verb?
Similar to the verb, devastation as a noun implies a widespread laying waste resulting from war or catastrophe, but it is also applicable to something that overwhelms an individual with comparable decisiveness. So it can mean total physical destruction over a wide area or an overwhelming emotional impact on a person. The source gives the devastation of losing a spouse, highlighting the emotional sense of total ruin.
That expands the meaning to include overwhelming emotional impact. Finally, destruction as a noun.
Destruction suggests an utter undoing by, or as if by, demolition or annihilation. It describes the state of total obliteration or the complete undoing of something, leaving nothing behind. The source gives, saw the rapid destruction of his life's work, implying its complete undoing or obliteration.
So destruction is total obliteration or undoing. Why these different terms for the result of disaster?
These nouns allow us to describe the outcome of disaster with different focuses. Is it the state of decay and collapse, ruin, the resulting chaos and disorder, havoc, widespread physical ruin or overwhelming emotional impact, devastation, or total obliteration or undoing destruction? Each term highlights a specific aspect of the aftermath.
Right.
And related to describing things falling apart, let's look at 3 more verbs that mean to subject to forces destructive of soundness, worth, or usefulness, often focusing on gradual processes or appearances. Ruin, verb, again, wreck, and dilapidate.
Okay, we saw ruin as a noun, the state of decay. What about ruin as a verb here?
Ruin as a verb usually suggests the action of destructive agencies and the ending of value, beauty, or well-being of something or someone, or the loss of something vital. It's a process that causes the state of ruin, noun. The source gives a reputation ruined by rumors, meaning the rumors actively destroyed its value and standing.
So ruin verb is the process causing decay or loss of value. What about wreck?
Wreck suggests being subject to forces that break down and scatter, and is likely to suggest damage that is beyond repair. It implies severe, irreversible damage, often by violent forces or through persistent, harmful actions. The source gives health wrecked by dissipation, implying a breakdown of health that can't be fixed.
So wreck is severe, irreversible damage, breaking down and scattering. Finally, dilapidate.
Dilapidate. Historically, it implies ruin resulting from neglect or abuse, but generally implies a shabby, rundown, or tumble-down condition without direct suggestion of culpability. It focuses on the worn, uncared-for appearance resulting from neglect, lack of maintenance, or simply age and disuse. The source gives, drove a dilapidated car which looks run down and in disrepair.
So dilapidate is becoming shabby or run down, often from neglect. Why these specific verbs for processes of decay?
These verbs describe different processes of causing damage. General destruction leading to loss of value or well-being, ruin. Irreversible breaking down by force or dissipation, wreck. Or neglect leading to disrepair and a shabby appearance, dilapidate. They offer different ways to describe something falling apart.
That gives us clear vocabulary for different processes and states of damage. Recovering from damage or decay, or achieving any goal, requires effort and striving. This brings us to words about effort and attainment, and then striving against others. Let's start with reach, the verb, gain, compass, the verb, achieve and attain, which mean to arrive at a point or end by effort or work.
Right. Reach is the most general term here. It can be used for anything arrived at by any degree of effort, even minimal. It simply signifies arriving at a point after some form of movement or effort. The source uses the example, after a long climb, we reach the top of the hill. The effort might be significant, but reach focuses on the successful arrival.
Simple arrival after effort. What about gain?
Gain likely implies a struggle to reach a contemplated or desired goal or end. It suggests overcoming obstacles, difficulty, or opposition to acquire something. The source example is gained a measure of self-confidence from the experience. It wasn't just received, it was earned through effort and overcoming challenges. Its antonyms are forfeit and lose.
So gain adds the idea of overcoming difficulty through struggle. And compass as a verb.
Compass implies exerting efforts to get around difficulties and transcend limitation, often connoting skill or craft in management or navigation. It suggests successfully getting around obstacles or limitations, often through skillful means. The source example is an actress taking on the most difficult role that her skills could compass, meaning she used her skill to successfully manage and perform a challenging part.
That's interesting. It brings in the element of skill or craft in handling the difficulty. How is achieve different?
Achieve can stress the skill or endurance as well as the effort involved in reaching an end. It emphasizes the successful completion or bringing about of something through sustained effort, skill, or endurance. The source uses achieve the success that was her due. It highlights the successful outcome resulting from effort and ability. Its antonym is miss.
So achieve is about the successful result from skill and effort.
And attain.
Attain stresses the spur of aspiration or ambition and suggests a reaching for the extreme, the unusual, or the difficult. It implies striving for something particularly challenging, lofty, or rare, often with the sense of reaching a peak or ultimate goal. The source example is vowed not to relax his efforts until peace was attained. This suggests a high, difficult, and ambitious goal that is striven for with great effort. Attain adds the layer of ambition and the exceptional nature of the goal itself. So we have general arrival, reach, arriving after struggle, gain, navigating difficulties skillfully, compass, successful completion through effort skill, and striving for ambitious, difficult goals, attain. Why should we care about these specific nuances in describing effort and attainment?
Well, these verbs provide a rich vocabulary to describe not just that someone arrived at an outcome, but how they got there and the nature of the goal. Did they just get there? Reach. Struggle for it. Gain. Skillfully navigate challenges, compass, successfully complete something through effort, achieve, or strive ambitiously for something difficult, attain.
Right.
Each word paints a different, more detailed picture of the journey and the accomplishment.
That definitely provides much more color than just saying someone got or reached something.
Yeah.
Building on the idea of effort and skill, sometimes that striving involves others. Websters gives us words meaning to strive to equal or surpass. Rival, compete, vie, and emulate.
Okay. Rival usually suggests an attempt to outdo each other. It implies direct competition against a specific opponent or set of opponents with the explicit goal of surpassing them. The source gives success that rivaled hers, meaning her success was trying to equal or surpass the level of someone else's success.
So rival is direct competition to outdo someone specific. What about compete?
Compete implies conscious but typically impersonal striving. It's striving against others within a system, game, market, or contest, where the opponents are often less personal and more numerous or abstract. Athletes competing in college sports, as the source gives, are striving against many others within the rules of a game.
So compete is more impersonal, striving against others within a framework. How does vie compare?
Vie suggests a less intense effort, but a more conscious awareness of an opponent than compete. It implies striving for something where there's an opponent, perhaps less formally or intensely than full-blown competition, but with a clear awareness of who else is striving for the same thing. The source gives, vied with one another for her attention, implying several people were subtly striving against each other for the same person's notice.
So vie is less intense striving, but with a clear awareness of opponents. Finally, emulate.
Emulate implies a conscious effort to equal or surpass one that serves as a model. This is a different kind of striving, not against an opponent in conflict, but using someone you admire as a positive example and trying to be as good as or better than them.
Right.
The source gives, strove to emulate his teachers, meaning he tried to equal or surpass the positive example set by his teachers.
So emulate is striving to equal or surpass a positive model. Why distinguish these forms of striving?
These terms differentiate the nature of the striving based on the relationship to the other party. Is it direct competition against a specific opponent? rival. Impersonal striving within a larger framework, compete. Less intense striving with conscious awareness of opponents, vie. Or striving against a positive model, emulate. Each word specifies the context and relationship within the competition or striving.
That helps specify the target and nature of the striving. And when striving involves others, the ease and skill with which we do things can be very noticeable. Let's look at describing quickness and skill in doing. Readiness, ease, facility, and dexterity.
Okay. Readiness emphasizes the quickness or promptitude with which something is done. It's about being prepared, willing, and quick to act or respond. The source gives, quote, indicated her readiness for the task, she was quick to respond.
So readiness is about being prompt and quick to act. What about ease?
Ease implies absence of strain or care or hesitation, resulting in smooth efficiency. It's about performing something skillfully without apparent effort, difficulty, or stress. The source example is answering a series of questions with ease, suggesting she answered smoothly and effortlessly. Its antonym is effort.
That's about seeming effortless in performance. How does facility compare?
Facility is often very close to ease, but sometimes suggests as a slick superficiality rather than true ease based on deep competence. It can imply a smooth skill that is perhaps glib, superficial, or lacks depth, even if it appears effortless. The source mentions a facility with words that was almost too glib, suggesting the smoothness felt a little shallow or insincere.
So facility can imply a smooth skill that might be superficial. And dexterity.
Dexterity implies proficient skill, such as results from training and practice. It's about well-honed ability and competence developed through experience, learning, and practice, often implying manual or mental skill applied with precision.
Right.
The source example is, handle the class with the dexterity of a master, suggesting skill born of long practice and experience. Its antonym is clumsiness.
So dexterity is about practiced, masterful skill. So we have promptness, readiness, effortless performance, ease, potentially superficial smoothness, facility, and skill developed through practice, dexterity. Why are these distinctions useful?
These nouns allow you to specify the type of skill or quickness you're describing. Are you highlighting promptness, effortless performance, a smooth skill that might be superficial, or deep competence born of practice? Each word adds a specific layer of meaning to the description of ability.
That's helpful for evaluating skills, beyond just saying someone is good at something. Now, when we talk about skills and our ability to understand the world, we often wrestle with what is true or real. Let's define reality and truth with real, actual, and true. They all relate to corresponding to facts, but with different emphasis.
Right. Real is likely to stress genuineness, especially correspondence between appearance and essence. It's about authenticity. It's something genuinely what it appears or claims to be. The source uses the example of a real diamond, meaning it's a genuine diamond, not a fake or imitation. Its antonyms are unreal, apparent, and imaginary.
So real is about authenticity and genuineness. What about actual?
Actual stresses the fact of existence or fidelity to the existent, as opposed to the non-existent, abstract, or hypothetical. It focuses on concrete existence and factual reality as it is, distinct from theories, possibilities, or imagination. The source example is, the actual tests of this missile have not yet been made. This emphasizes that the tests exist as facts in reality, not just as plans or hypothetical ideas. Its antonyms are ideal and imaginary.
So actual is about concrete, factual existence as opposed to theory or imagination. And true.
True can stress conformity to the real, especially as a model or standard, or conformity to the pertinent facts that are known or knowable. It's about accuracy, whether something is accurate according to established facts, or whether it conforms to a standard or model of what is real for its kind.
Okay.
The source gives two examples. The ladybug is not a true bug. It doesn't conform to the standard definition of a true bug. And the true version of events, it conforms accurately to the known facts. Its antonym is false.
So true is about accuracy and conformity to facts or standards. So we have authenticity, real, concrete existence, actual, and accuracy, conformity, true. Why does separating these matter?
Well, distinguishing these helps clarify what aspect of factualness or genuineness you're emphasizing. Are you confirming authenticity, real, stating concrete existence as fact, actual, or verifying accuracy or conformity to a standard, true? They are all related to facts, but they highlight different facets of that factualness, which can be critical in clear communication.
That's a subtle but really important set of differences for discussing facts and reality. Finding the truth often involves collecting information, much like a harvest. Websters gives us words for collecting ripened crops that we can use as metaphors for collecting information. Reap, glean, gather, garner, and harvest.
These are excellent metaphors for knowledge acquisition and management. Reap basically means cutting or collecting ripened grain, the primary yield of a crop. When used metaphorically, it often suggests collecting the results or rewards of your efforts, like hoping to reap the rewards of hard work. It's about collecting the main outcomes.
So reap is like getting the main outcomes or results of something.
Yes. Glean implies a stripping of a field already gone over, collecting the leftover bits of grain that were missed during the main reaping. Metaphorically, it applies to gathering useful bits of information overlooked by others or bits that are scattered and hard to find.
Right.
The source says gleaned new evidence from the crime site, suggesting finding scattered, less obvious details that others might have missed.
So glean is picking up the overlooked or scattered details. What about gather?
Gather applies to any collecting or bringing together of material, stressing, amassing, or accumulating. This is the most general term for collecting information from various sources, simply bringing it all together into one place or collection. You gather information from books, interviews, websites, etc.
Gather is broad collection and accumulation. And garner.
Garner implies the storing of produce reaped or gathered, like putting grain in a granary or any laying away of a store of something. Metaphorically, it's about collecting and storing knowledge, insights, or facts, accumulating a storehouse of information. The source gives garnered maxims from neighbors collecting wise sayings and storing them up in memory or notes.
So garner adds the idea of collecting and storing the collected knowledge. And harvest.
Harvest may imply any or all of these practices: reaping, gleaning, gathering, garnering, or any gathering in or husbanding of a crop, or, metaphorically, information. It often refers to the overall process of collecting the full yield from a source or experience. The source mentions harvested a bumper crop, the entire successful collection of the yield.
So harvest is the overall process of collecting the full yield of information or results. So we have collecting main results, reap, finding scattered details, glean, broad collection, gather, collecting and storing, garner, and collecting the full yield, harvest. Why use these agricultural terms to talk about knowledge?
Applying these distinctions helps us think about different ways we acquire, collect, and manage knowledge. Are we getting the main results from a study, reap, finding scattered details in an archive, glean, simply collecting broadly from various sources for a project, gather? Are we collecting and storing our findings over time, garner? Or are we talking about the total yield of knowledge from a source or experience, harvest? It provides a richer, more evocative vocabulary for the process of learning and research.
That's a very helpful set of metaphors that really clarifies different kinds of information collection. Sometimes, when faced with difficult truths or unpleasantness, we might instinctively react negatively. This brings us to words about drawing back from discomfort or aversion, starting with verbs describing the reaction. Recoil, shrink, flinch, wince, blench, and quail. They all mean to draw back in fear or distaste, but they differ in nuance.
Right. Recoil implies a start of a movement away prompted by shock, fear, or disgust. It's often a strong, sudden physical or emotional pullback from something perceived as dangerous, unpleasant, or shocking. The source gives recoils at the sight of blood. Antonyms are confront and defy.
So recoil is a strong, sudden reaction or movement away from something negative. What about shrink?
Shrink suggests an instinctive recoiling through sensitiveness, scrupulousness, or cowardice. It implies a deeper, perhaps moral, sensitive, or fearful reluctance to face or engage with something. The source uses refuse to shrink from responsibilities, suggesting a reluctance to avoid duties due to fear or ethical concerns.
So shrink is an instinctive reluctance, potentially due to sensitivity or fear. How is flinch different?
Flinch implies a failure to endure pain or to face something dangerous or frightening with resolution. It's about showing physical or emotional resistance to pain, fear, or difficulty, often by making a quick, jerky movement.
Okay.
The source gives, faced her accusers without flinching, meaning she faced them resolutely without showing physical or emotional signs of fear or pain.
So flinch is about failing to endure or face something bravely, often with a quick movement. And wince.
Wince suggests a slight involuntary physical recoiling, often facial, from what pains, frightens, or disgusts. It's a small, often uncontrolled reaction to minor discomfort, pain, or embarrassment. The source gives, winced when the secretary called him by his first name, suggesting a slight involuntary reaction to discomfort or annoyance.
That's a small involuntary reaction, often just facial. What about blench?
Blench implies faint-hearted, fearful flinching. It's a somewhat archaic term emphasizing fear and often a physical reaction like turning pale.
Ah.
The source uses never blenched even as his head was lowered on the guillotine, suggesting extreme bravery despite overwhelming fear, where a normal person would have blenched, turned pale, and flinched.
So blench implies fearful flinching, often with paleness. And quail.
Quail suggests a shrinking and cowering in fear. It implies a significant loss of courage and a visible reaction of fear and submission, often involving shrinking back or trembling. The source gives quailed at the fury of the storm, suggesting a complete loss of composure and a visible display of fear in the face of overwhelming power.
That paints a picture of profound fear and loss of courage. So we have sudden, strong reaction, recoil, instinctive reluctance, shrink, failure to face bravely, flinch, slight involuntary reaction, wince, fearful flinching, turning pale, blanch, and shrinking, cowering in fear, quail. Why have so many words for drawing back from discomfort?
These verbs provide a rich vocabulary to describe nuanced negative reactions to unpleasant stimuli, varying in intensity, volition, and physical manifestation. You can describe a sudden shock reaction, recoil, a deeper, perhaps moral or sensitive reluctance, shrink, failing to endure pain or fear resolutely, flinch, a slight involuntary reaction, wince, a fearful turning pale, blench, or a profound loss of courage and visible fear, quail.
Right.
Each word captures a specific aspect of the reaction, allowing for more precise descriptions of emotional and physical responses to discomfort or threat.
Building on that, some things are themselves so unlikable that they cause this aversion or antagonism. Websters gives us adjectives that describe this quality: repugnant, repellent, abhorrent, distasteful, obnoxious, and invidious.
Okay, so these describe the quality of the thing causing the negative reaction. Let's start with repugnant. Repugnant applies to something so alien to one's ideas, principles, or tastes as to arouse strong resistance or loathing. It's something deeply offensive to one's fundamental values, beliefs, or aesthetic sensibilities. The source regards boxing as repugnant, meaning it offends their sense of what is right or acceptable. Its antonym is congenial.
So repugnant is deeply offensive to one's values or tastes, causing strong aversion. What about repellent?
Repellent suggests a generally forbidding or unpleasant quality that causes one to back away. It's something off-putting, disagreeable, or unpleasant that makes you want to avoid it or move away from it without necessarily being as deeply offensive as repugnant. The source the public display of grief was repellent, suggesting it was simply unpleasant or off-putting to observe. Antonyms are attractive and pleasing.
So repellent is simply off-putting or unpleasant, making you back away. How is abhorrent different from repugnant?
Abhorrent implies a repugnance that causes active antagonism. While repugnant can mean deeply offensive, abhorrent adds the layer of causing active opposition, strong dislike, or even hatred that makes you want to fight against it.
Okay.
The source gives practices abhorrent to the political system, meaning these practices are so disliked they cause active opposition within the system. Its antonym is congenial.
So abhorrent is intensely disliked, leading to active opposition. And distasteful.
Distasteful implies a contrariness to one's tastes or inclinations. It's a milder term, simply meaning something is unpleasant, disagreeable, or goes against one's personal preference or decorum without necessarily causing deep offense or strong antagonism.
Right.
The source gives a family to whom displays of affection are distasteful, meaning such displays are unpleasant or disagreeable to them personally. Antonyms are agreeable and palatable.
So distasteful is unpleasant or disagreeable to personal taste or preference.
Yeah.
And obnoxious.
Obnoxious suggests an objectionableness, often on personal grounds, too great to tolerate. It describes someone or something that is highly offensive, irritating, or offensive in a personal way, often to the point of being unbearable. The source gives the tea tax was especially obnoxious to colonists, meaning it was highly offensive and irritating to them personally. Its antonym is grateful.
So obnoxious is highly offensive, often personally irritating or intolerable. Finally, invidious.
Invidious applies to what cannot be used or performed without creating ill will, odium, or envy. This word describes something that, because of its nature or how it's handled, is likely to cause resentment, envy, or unpopularity among others.
Oh.
The source gives the invidious task of deciding custody, which is a task that will inevitably create ill will or resentment no matter how it's decided.
So invidious describes something that causes resentment or envy in others. Why all these terms for unlikable qualities?
Well, these adjectives differentiate negative qualities based on the intensity and type of aversion they cause. From simply unpleasant to personal preference, distasteful, to being off-putting, repellent, deeply offensive to values, repugnant, intensely disliked leading to opposition, abhorrent, highly personally offensive, obnoxious, or causing resentment, envy in others, invidious. They give us precise ways to describe why something is unlikable.
That covers a wide range of negative feelings and their causes. Expressing these aversions or any thoughts or information involves communication. This leads us to a few groups of words about mentioning, observing, sharing unverified talk, and revealing secrets. Let's start with how we point attention to something. Refer, allude, and advert.
Okay. Refer usually implies the intentional introduction and distinct and specific mention, and sometimes judging. It's a clear, direct, and explicit mention of something or someone. The source gives, referred to or claims as fantasy, a direct and specific judgment.
So refer is direct, specific mention, often intentional. What about allude?
Allude suggests an indirect mention by a hint, roundabout expression, or figure of speech. You're referencing something without naming it directly, relying on the listener or reader to understand the hint or implicit connection. The source gives, alluded to incidents previously unknown, hinting at them without explicit detail.
So allude is indirect mention, hinting at something.
Yeah.
And advert.
Advert usually implies a slight or glancing reference in a text or utterance. It's a brief mention in passing, often touching on something that is not the main topic, but might be discussed more fully later. The source gives, a theory adverted to here but discussed later, showing it's a brief preliminary mention.
So advert is a brief passing mention. So we have direct, specific mention, refer, indirect hinting, allude, and brief passing mention, advert. Why are these distinctions useful?
Well, these help you describe how something is brought to attention in communication. Are you making a clear point? Refer. Hinting subtly, allude, or just making a brief mention in passing, advert. This allows for precision in describing communication styles, whether written or spoken.
That's a great way to talk about the subtlety, or lack thereof, in communication. Building on mentioning, sometimes our communication involves making observations and passing judgment. Websters gives us remark, comment, commentate, and animadvert.
Okay. Remark implies little more than a desire to notice and call attention to something. It's a simple observation or statement, often without much depth, analysis, or strong opinion. The source gives, remarked on the pleasant weather, a straightforward observation.
So remark is a simple observation. What about comment?
Comment stresses often critical interpretation. It implies adding analysis, opinion, or judgment to an observation, often providing an explanation or critique. The source gives, refuse to comment about the situation, implying a refusal to provide an opinion or analysis.
So comment adds interpretation, analysis, or judgment.
Oh.
How does commentate differ?
Commentate is sometimes substituted for comment to suggest a purely expository or interpretive intent, often in a professional or public capacity. It's about providing ongoing explanation, analysis, or interpretation, like a sports commentator or a political commentator. The source gives, commentating knowledgeably on current events, suggesting a role of explaining and analyzing events.
So commentate is professional or extensive exposition or interpretation.
And
animadvert.
animadvert. This implies a remarking or commentating usually of scholarly caliber or based on careful judgment, but often emphasizes the passing of an adverse judgment. It's a formal, often detailed or scholarly criticism, frequently negative and based on careful consideration. The source gives, elders animadverting on rock music, suggesting a formal, negative critique based on their judgment.
So animadvert is formal, often scholarly, and usually negative criticism. So we have simple observation, remark, interpretation, judgment, comment, professional explanation, analysis, commentate, and formal, often negative scholarly criticism, animadvert. Why these different terms for observing and judging?
These terms describe different levels of depth, intent, and criticality in making observations and expressing judgment. They range from a simple statement of notice to detailed, often critical analysis, whether casual or formal, highlighting the specific nature of the observation or critique.
And when we talk about others, sometimes the talk is unverified and spreads quickly. Webster's gives us words for common talk or an instance of it that spreads rapidly. Report, rumor, gossip, and hearsay. Report is likely the most neutral sounding here.
It is. Report is likely to suggest some ground for belief unless qualified as false. It implies a story circulating that might be true or has some plausible basis. The source gives, it was common report that they were living together, suggesting a story that was widely circulating and might have some credibility, even if not confirmed.
So report is circulating talk with some potential credibility. What about rumor?
Rumor applies to a report that flies about, often gains in detail, but lacks both evidence source and clear evidence of truth. It's unverified talk that spreads rapidly and often changes or becomes exaggerated as it passes from person to person with no clear origin or proof. The source gives unsubstantiated rumors that spread like wildfire.
So rumor is unverified, changing talk without a clear source or evidence. How does gossip compare?
Gossip applies primarily to the idle, often personal chatter that is the chief source and means of propagating rumors or reports. It's the act of talking about others' personal affairs, often informally and for pleasure, and this act often fuels the spread of rumors. The source gives wrote a gossip column, referring to a column dedicated to sharing personal, often unverified stories about people.
So gossip is the personal, often idle talk itself, the engine of rumor and hearsay.
Hearsay stresses the source of a rumor or report as what is heard rather than what is seen or known directly. And it implies indirect and imperfect knowledge of facts, especially in a legal context regarding evidence. It's information received secondhand from someone else's report rather than from direct personal observation or knowledge.
Okay.
The source gives, rumored by hearsay, and based his prosecution on hearsay evidence, highlighting the secondhand and thus potentially unreliable nature of the information.
So hearsay is information that comes from a secondhand source. So we have circulating talk with potential credibility, report, unverified, spreading talk without a clear source, rumor, the personal chatter that spreads it, gossip, and information from a secondhand source, hearsay. Why differentiate these forms of unverified talk?
These terms allow you to describe the nature and perceived reliability or lack thereof of circulating stories. They differentiate based on potential credibility, lack of source evidence, and changing nature, focus on personal details, and the directness of the source. This is crucial for understanding how information and, well, misinformation spreads.
Absolutely. Finally, relating to communication, sometimes what is communicated is something that was previously secret or concealed. Websters gives us verbs meaning to make known what has been or should be concealed. Reveal, discover, disclose, divulge, tell, and betray. Reveal seems like a general term for making something known.
It is, but it often suggests an unveiling of what is not clear, whether something profound, mystical, or just previously hidden or obscure. It's making something visible, known, or understood that was previously hidden or unclear. The source gives divine will revealed in the Bible, and an act that revealed his true nature, both implying an unveiling of something previously hidden or unknown. Its antonym is conceal.
So reveal is unveiling something hidden or unclear. What about discover?
Discover implies an uncovering of matters kept secret and not previously known, often through investigation, exploration, or observation. It's about finding something that existed, but was hidden or unknown. The source gives discovered a clear case of plagiarism, meaning they found evidence that was hidden.
So discover is finding something secret or previously unknown. How does disclose compare?
Disclose may also imply a discovering, but more often suggests an imparting of information previously kept secret. It's the act of sharing or making public secret information, often formally or officially, by the person or entity who holds it. The source gives candidates must disclose financial assets, meaning they must make that previously private information public.
So disclose is the act of sharing secret information. And divulge.
Divulge implies a disclosure involving some impropriety or breach of confidence. It's revealing something that shouldn't be shared, often breaking a trust, violating a rule, or inappropriately making private information public. The source gives refuse to divulge confidential information, implying that sharing it would be a breach of trust.
So divulge implies improperly sharing secret information, breaking a confidence.
Yeah.
And tell.
Tell implies an imparting of necessary or useful information. It's a very general term for communicating information, which may or may not have been secret or concealed, and without the specific connotations of the other words. The source gives never told her that he was married, which is simply the act of not communicating that information.
So tell is simple communication of information. Finally, betray.
Betray implies a divulging that represents a breach of faith or an involuntary or unconscious disclosure. It's revealing something, whether secret or not, due to disloyalty, breaking trust, or unintentionally allowing something to become known. The source gives a blush that betrayed her embarrassment, which is an involuntary physical sign that revealed her emotion.
So betray is revealing due to disloyalty or unintentionally. So we have unveiling something, hidden and clear, reveal, finding something secret, discover, formally sharing secret information, disclose, improperly sharing secret information, divulge, simply communicating information, tell, and revealing due to disloyalty or unintentionally betray. Why all these verbs for revealing secrets?
These differentiate how secrets or concealed things are made known, focusing on the manner, intent, source, and implications of the revelation. They vary from a simple unveiling to finding something hidden, deliberately sharing, improperly sharing, general communication, or unintentional or disloyal revelation.
Right.
This vocabulary allows for very precise descriptions of how information comes to light and the consequences of that revelation.
That's a powerful set of words for understanding how information flows or is prevented from flowing. And speaking of preventing things, communication is tricky, and sometimes we need to hold ourselves back or control our impulses or words. Webster's gives us two related groups: verbs meaning to keep oneself voluntarily from doing or indulging in something, and verbs meaning to hold back from or control in doing something. Let's start with voluntarily keeping oneself from doing something. Refrain, abstain, and forbear.
Okay. Refrain is likely to suggest the checking of a passing impulse. It's about resisting a momentary urge, temptation, or desire. The source gives refrain from laughter in church, which is about holding back a spontaneous impulse.
So refrain is stopping a temporary impulse. What about abstain?
Abstain usually implies deliberate renunciation or self-denial on principle, and often suggests permanency of intent. It's a committed decision based on a principle or belief to permanently or semi-permanently avoid something. The source gives a vegetarian who abstains from all meat. Its antonym is indulge.
So abstain is a principled, often long-term self-denial, and forbear.
Forbear usually implies self-restraint rather than self-denial, often motivated by patience, charity, clemency, discretion, or stoicism. It's holding back from an action or expression, not necessarily due to a strong principle against it, but based on a calculated decision related to the situation, character, or a desire to be patient, discreet, or tolerant. The source gives, taught himself to forbear such expressions of anger, suggesting he learned self-restraint for the sake of composure or social harmony.
So forbear is self-restraint based on patience, discretion, or character. So we have resisting a temporary impulse, refrain, principled, often permanent self-denial, abstain, and self-restraint based on discretion or character, forbear. Why are these important nuances?
These terms differentiate the motive and nature of holding back. Are you simply resisting a momentary urge? Making a principled, often permanent stand against something? Or exercising self-restraint for practical or character-based reasons like patience, discretion, or tolerance? Each word specifies the why behind the decision to hold back.
Related to that, sometimes it's about controlling something stronger or impeding progress. Let's look at restrain, check, curb, and bridle, meaning to hold back from or control in doing something. Restrain again, this time as a verb for controlling others or stronger forces.
Yes. Restraint suggests a holding back by force or persuasion from acting or going to extremes. It's about preventing someone or something from acting, moving, or going too far, often through external influence or effort. The source gives restrain themselves from trading insults, meaning they held back their impulses. Antonyms are impel, incite, activate, and abandon oneself.
So restrain is preventing action or excess, often through effort. What about check?
Check implies the restraining or impeding of a progress, activity, or impetus. It's about slowing down, stopping, or halting forward movement, momentum, or activity. The source gives deep mud checked our progress, meaning the mud impeded or stopped their forward movement. Antonyms are accelerate, advance, and release.
So check is slowing or stopping progress or momentum. How does curb compare?
Curb suggests an abrupt or drastic checking or a restricting or restraining that tends to moderate. It's about sharply limiting or moderating something, like an impulse, power, or desire. The source gives learn to curb your appetite, meaning to significantly limit or moderate it. Its antonym is spur.
So curb is sharply limiting or moderating something. And bridle.
Bridle implies a keeping under control by subduing or holding in. This term evokes the image of controlling a horse with a bridle, suggesting controlling something strong, unruly, or potentially rebellious by keeping it tightly held. The source gives, they could no longer bridle their interest, meaning their strong interest became too difficult to control or hold back. Its antonym is vent.
So bridle is subduing and tightly holding in control, often something strong. So we have general holding back, preventing excess restrain, slowing, stopping progress, check, sharply limiting, moderating, curb, and subduing, holding in something strong, bridle.
Yeah.
Why use these different terms for control?
These verbs describe different methods and degrees of controlling impulses, actions, or progress. They vary from general prevention to specific impeding of momentum, sharp limitation of something, or the forceful subduing of something strong or unruly. Choosing the right word gives a specific sense of the nature of the control being exerted.
That's a detailed vocabulary for describing different types of control. Holding back or controlling ourselves relates to how we interact and relate to others and how we evaluate them. This leads us to words about shared connection, positive evaluation, and adverse criticism. Let's start with shared connection. Reciprocal, mutual, and common.
Okay. Reciprocal implies an exchange or interaction between two sides, toward, against, or in relation to each other. It's about a back-and-forth relationship where something is given or done by each party in relation to the other. The source uses allies with a reciprocal defense agreement, meaning they agree to defend each other. The defense flows in both directions.
So reciprocal is about an exchange or back-and-forth interaction between two parties. What about mutual?
Mutual applies to feelings or actions shared or experienced by two, and may suggest accompanying reciprocity, equality, or interaction. It's often about a shared feeling, state, or attribute between two people or things, rather than necessarily a direct exchange of actions.
Right.
The source gives two people with a mutual physical attraction, meaning both individuals feel the attraction towards each other.
So mutual is shared feeling or state between two, while reciprocal is exchanged action. And common.
Common does not suggest reciprocity, but merely a sharing with others. This can involve more than two people or things. It's about shared traits, interests, possessions, or experiences that belong to or are shared by a group. The source gives a couple with many common interests. Its antonym is individual.
So common is simply shared by a group of any size. So we have exchange between two, reciprocal, shared feeling, state between two, mutual, and simply shared by a group. Common. Why understand these differences?
These terms allow you to precisely describe the nature of a shared relationship or attribute. Are you describing an exchange of actions or benefits, shared feelings or experiences between two, or simply characteristics or possessions that belong to a group? Choosing the right word clarifies the specific nature of the connection or shared attribute.
Moving from connection to how we evaluate others. Let's look at words meaning to recognize the worth of a person or thing, describing degrees of esteem. Regard, respect, esteem, and admire. Regard feels like the most general here.
It is. Regard is a general term that is usually qualified to indicate a level. It implies a general level of consideration, estimation, or feeling towards someone or something, which can be high or low. The source gives, he is not highly regarded in the profession, indicating a low level of general consideration. Its antonym is despise.
So regard is a general level of consideration. What about respect?
Respect implies a considered evaluation or estimation as the basis of recognition of worth. You value someone or something based on their merits, achievements, qualities, or position after careful thought or observation. The source gives, after many years they came to respect her views, suggesting they valued her views based on their perceived worth built over time. Antonyms include abuse, misuse, and scorn.
So respect is valuing someone based on evaluated worth or merit. And esteem.
Esteem implies a high valuation and a consequent warmth of feeling or attachment. It's not just valuing someone highly based on their merits, but doing so with affection, admiration, or a warm feeling. The source gives, no citizen was more highly esteemed, meaning they were valued highly and held in warm regard by the citizens. Its antonym is abominate.
So esteem adds warmth and affection to high valuation. And admire.
Admire suggests a usually enthusiastic but uncritical appreciation and often deep affection. It's looking up to something or someone with pleasure, approval, and often deep affection, appreciating their qualities without necessarily critically evaluating their flaws. The source gives, admired the natural beauty of the scene, expressing enthusiastic appreciation and pleasure. Its antonym is abhor.
So admire is enthusiastic appreciation, often with deep affection. So we have general consideration, regard, valuing based on evaluated worth, respect, high evaluation with warmth, esteem, and enthusiastic, often uncritical appreciation with affection, admire. Why are these distinctions important?
These terms describe increasing levels and different qualities of positive evaluation and feeling towards someone or something. From a general level of consideration to valuing based on merit, to high valuation with affection, to enthusiastic, appreciative admiration. Choosing the right word specifies the nature and depth of the positive feeling or judgment.
Related to profound respect, Websters also provides terms for emotion inspired by something great, superior, sacred, or mysterious. Reverence, the noun, awe, and a fear in a specific sense. Reverence here is a noun distinct from the verb meaning to regard with respect.
Yes, reverence, noun, stresses a recognition of the sacredness or inviolability of the person or thing which stimulates the emotion. It's respect tinged with solemnity, devotion, or a sense of the sacredness or deep importance of something. The source gives demonstrated a lack of reverence for truth, meaning a lack of solemn respect for its sacred importance.
So reverence is solemn respect for the sacred or deeply important. What about awe?
Awe fundamentally implies a sense of being overwhelmed or overcome by great superiority or impressiveness. It's a feeling of wonder, admiration, respect, and sometimes fear or terror inspired by something vast, powerful, or sublime. The source gives stood in awe of his talent, feeling overwhelmed by the impressiveness of his ability.
So awe is feeling overwhelmed by greatness or power.
And fear in the
And
some
context.
context. Fear, in this specific sense described by Websters, occurs chiefly in religious use and implies awed recognition of divine power and majesty. It's not terror or simple fright, but a profound respect, submission, and sometimes trembling inspired by the overwhelming power and majesty of a divine being. The source gives lived in fear of the Lord. Its antonym is contempt.
So fear here is religious submission and respect for divine power. So I have solemn respect for the sacred reverence, feeling overwhelmed by greatness, awe, and religious submission to divine power. Fear. Why distinguish these emotional responses?
These terms describe different emotional responses to power, sacredness, or greatness. They differentiate between solemn respect for what is sacred, the feeling of being overpowered by something impressive, and the specific religious sense of submission to divine majesty.
Now, while those words describe positive or solemn evaluation, we also have words for adverse criticism that vary in intensity and formality. Let's look at reprove, rebuke, reprimand, admonish, reproach, and chide. Reprove sounds less harsh than some of the others.
It does. Reprove implies an often kindly censuring or blaming intended to correct a fault. It's gentle, well-intentioned criticism aimed at helping someone improve or learn from a mistake. The source gives gently reproved her table manners.
So reprove is gentle correction. What about rebuke?
Rebuke suggests a sharp or stern reproof. This is stronger, more severe criticism, expressing clear disapproval in a harsh manner. The source gives the letter rebuke dissenting officials.
So rebuke is sharp, stern criticism. How does reprimand compare?
Reprimand implies a severe, formal, and often public or official rebuke. This is a serious, formal censure, often given by someone in authority in an official context.
Right.
The source gives a general officially reprimanded for speaking out of turn.
So reprimand is formal, severe criticism by authority, and admonish.
Admonish suggests an earnest or friendly warning and counseling. It's advice mixed with caution, intended to warn someone about a potential mistake or danger and guide them towards better behavior. The source gives admonish by my parents to control expenses. Its antonym is commend.
So admonish is a warning mixed with advice. And reproach.
Reproach connotes the conveying of dissatisfaction or displeasure through criticism or fault-finding. It's expressing blame or disapproval, often verbally highlighting someone's faults or failures. The source gives were severely reproached for their late return.
So reproach is expressing blame or dissatisfaction. Finally, chide.
Chide suggests the expression of disappointment or displeasure through mild reproof or scolding. It's gentle scolding, often from affection, disappointment, or mild annoyance, typically used with children or those in a less formal relationship. The source gives chided by their mother for not keeping rooms clean. Its antonym is commend.
So chide is mild scolding, often from affection or disappointment. So we have gentle correction, reprove, sharp, stern criticism, rebuke, formal official censure, reprimand, warning with counsel, admonish, expressing blame, dissatisfaction, reproach, and mild scolding, chide. Why all these words for criticizing?
These terms describe criticism varying in intensity, formality, and underlying intent. They allow you to specify whether the criticism is gentle and corrective, sharp and severe, formal and official, a warning, an expression of blame, or mild scolding. This precision is vital for accurately describing interpersonal feedback and discipline.
That's a very useful spectrum of criticism. Moving from relationships and evaluations, sometimes situations break down, requiring us to give things up or seek assistance. Let's look at degrees of giving up, forms of voluntary surrender, seeking help, and temporary alternatives. First, verbs meaning to give up completely. Relinquish, yield, resign, surrender, abandon, and waive.
Okay. Relinquish may suggest some regret, reluctance, or weakness in the giving up. It implies giving up something important, like a possession, power, or claim, perhaps unwillingly or with sadness. The source gives relinquish her crown with bittersweet feelings. Its antonym is keep.
So relinquish is giving up with regret or reluctance. What about yield?
Yield implies a concession of compliance or submission to force or pressure. It's giving in because you are forced to, or acknowledging a greater power or expertise. The source gives, I yield to your greater expertise.
So yield is giving in under force or pressure. How does resign compare?
Resign emphasizes a voluntary relinquishment or sacrifice without struggle. It's giving up something willingly, often a position, office, or right, choosing to do so without fighting to keep it. The source gives resigned rather than work under new terms.
So resign is voluntary giving up without struggle, often a position, and surrender.
Surrender implies a giving up to an external compulsion or demand after a struggle to retain or resist. It's giving in to an opponent or authority after having fought or resisted, often in a military or conflict situation. The source gives, forced to sign a document surrendering claims, implying they had resisted but were compelled to give up.
So surrender is giving in after a fight or resistance.
Yeah.
And abandon.
Abandon stresses finality and completeness in giving up. It means leaving something or someone completely and permanently, often with no intention of returning or resuming.
Right.
The source gives abandon all hope. Antonyms are cherish and restrain.
So abandon is complete and final giving up. Finally, waive.
Waive implies a conceding or foregoing with little or no compulsion. It's specifically giving up a right, claim, or privilege voluntarily, often formally, without being forced to do so. The source gives waived the right to a trial by jury.
So waive is voluntarily giving up a right or claim. So we have giving up with regret, relinquish, giving in under force, yield, voluntary giving up without struggle, resign, giving in after a fight, surrender, complete final giving up, abandon, and voluntarily giving up a right, waive. Why differentiate all these?
Well, these terms describe different scenarios and motivations for giving something up. They specify why and how something is given up with regret, under force, willingly, after a struggle, completely and finally, or by choice of a specific right.
Closely related to giving up things, especially rights or desires, is the idea of voluntary surrender or foregoing something desired, often for principle or self-control. Websters gives us nouns: renunciation, abnegation, self-abnegation, and self-denial. Renunciation sounds quite formal and significant.
It does. Renunciation commonly connotes personal sacrifice for a higher end. It's giving up something important, often a position of power, a claim, or deeply held belief, for the sake of a greater principle, cause, or spiritual goal. The source gives his voluntary renunciation of power.
So renunciation is significant sacrifice for a higher purpose. What about abnegation and self-abnegation?
Both abnegation and self-abnegation imply a high degree of unselfishness or a capacity for putting aside personal interest or desires for the sake of others or a duty. It's denying oneself for altruistic reasons or devotion to a task. The source gives undertake duties with an air of abnegation, suggesting selflessness in performing duties, and modesty verging on self-abnegation, implying extreme selflessness or humility. Antonyms are indulgence and self-indulgence.
So abnegation is about denying oneself for unselfish reasons or duty, and self-denial.
Self-denial usually applies to an act or a practice and implies a forbearance from gratifying one's desires, whatever the motive. It's the act or habit of resisting one's own desires, whether for a higher cause, for others, for personal discipline, or simply a rigid routine. The source gives the self-denial involved in a rigid diet. Its antonym is self-indulgence.
So self-denial is the act or practice of resisting one's desires, regardless of the specific reason. So we have sacrificing for a higher purpose, renunciation, denying oneself for unselfishness, duty, abnegation, and the act practice of resisting desires, self-denial. Why differentiate these?
These distinguish between giving up for a significant higher cause, denying oneself out of unselfishness or duty, and the simple act or practice of denying one's own desires, highlighting the different motives and scope of the self-giving.
When faced with difficulties we can't overcome alone, we often need to seek help. Websters provides verbs meaning to have recourse to something when in need. Resort, the verb, refer, the verb, apply, go, and turn. We saw resort as a noun meaning a last option. What about the verb?
Right. Resort verb may imply that one has encountered difficulties impossible to surmount without help. It suggests turning to something or someone as a necessary last option when other means have failed to find a solution or relief. The source gives, quote, could get no relief unless he resorted to the courts.
So resort verb is turning to something as a necessary last option when stuck.
Yeah.
What about refer, verb again?
We saw refer earlier, meaning to mention something directly. Here, as in refer to a dictionary, it suggests the need for authentic information or authoritative action and recourse to a source that can provide this. It's consulting a source of authority, information, or expertise to get what is needed. The source gives, when you encounter an unfamiliar word, refer to your dictionary.
So refer verb is consulting an authoritative source for information or action. How does apply compare?
Apply suggests having direct recourse, as by letter or in person, to one able to supply what is needed. It's making a formal request, often in person or in writing, to a specific person or entity who has the capability to provide what is needed. The source gives, apply to a bank for a loan.
So apply is making a formal request to a source that can help. And go in turn.
Go and turn are more general but often more picturesque or dramatic terms that suggest action or movement in seeking aid or relief. They emphasize the act of seeking help from a source, often with a sense of urgency, desperation, or emotional need, conveying the direct movement towards the source of aid.
Mm-hmm.
The source gives, the president went directly to the people and turned to his mother for comfort.
So go and turn are more general, often dramatic ways of seeking aid or comfort. So we have turning to a last option, resort, consulting an authoritative source, refer, making a formal request, apply, and general, often dramatic, seeking of aid, go turn. Why distinguish these ways of seeking help?
These verbs specify how and why someone seeks help, providing important context about the situation and the nature of the assistance sought. It allows you to articulate whether the help is a necessary last resort, seeking information from an expert, making a formal request, or simply the act of turning to someone for support.
When the usual means fail, we often turn to temporary alternatives. Websters gives us nouns for something one turns to in the absence of usual means. Resource, resort, noun again, expedient, shift, makeshift, and stopgap. Okay, we've seen resort, noun, meaning a last option. What about resource?
The resource applies to anything one falls back upon. It's a general term for available means of help, support, or supply that can be used in a difficult situation. The source gives, haven't exhausted all of my resources yet, implying they still have available means to draw upon.
So resource is a general available means of help. What about resort, noun, compared to that?
Resort, noun, is like resource, but is used mostly with last or in the phrase to have resort to. It specifically emphasizes something used when all other options are gone or have failed.
Right.
The source gives, favor a sales tax only as a last resort, meaning it's the option to be used only when absolutely necessary after others are ruled out.
So resort is specifically a last option, more specific than resource. How does expedient compare?
Expedient may apply to any device or contrivance used when the usual one is not at hand or not possible. It's a temporary solution, means, or method that is convenient or practical for the moment, even if it's not the ideal or permanent solution. The source gives the flimsiest of expedients, suggesting a quick, perhaps inadequate, temporary solution.
So expedient is a temporary solution when the usual isn't available, emphasizing convenience or practicality. And shift.
Shift implies a tentative or temporary imperfect expedient and often connotes dubiousness or trickery. It's a temporary, unreliable, and potentially deceptive or cunning solution, often one that is difficult or risky to rely on. The source gives her desperate shifts and dodges, suggesting tricky and unreliable temporary measures taken out of desperation.
So shift is a tricky, unreliable, temporary solution, often implying dubiousness, and makeshift.
Makeshift implies an inferior expedient adopted because of urgent need or countenance through indifference. It's a poor quality temporary solution made out of necessity because the proper thing isn't available, or adopted due to a lack of care or standards. The source gives, the space heater was supposed to be only a makeshift, indicating a temporary, inadequate solution.
So makeshift is a poor quality, temporary fix due to need or indifference. Finally, stopgap.
Stopgap applies to something used temporarily as an emergency measure to fill a gap or solve an immediate problem until a more permanent solution can be found. It's a quick fix designed to address an immediate issue temporarily. The source gives, the farm aid bill is no more than a stopgap, meaning it's a temporary measure, not a permanent solution to the underlying problem.
So stopgap is a temporary emergency measure to fill a gap.
Yeah.
They have general available means, resource, a last option resort, a convenient temporary solution, expedient, a tricky, unreliable temporary shift, a poor quality temporary fix, makeshift, and a temporary emergency measure, stopgap. Why all these terms for temporary solutions?
These nouns allow you to describe temporary solutions with great precision, specifying their quality, reliability, purpose, and the necessity that drove their adoption. They differentiate between drawing upon available means, turning to a last resort, using a convenient alternative, relying on tricky methods, employing a poor quality fix, or implementing an emergency measure.
That's a very comprehensive way to talk about temporary fixes and their implications. When things are broken, damaged, or lost, sometimes we need to make them new, bring them back to life, replace them entirely, or even undo actions. This brings us to a few groups of verbs related to making things new, restoring vitality, replacing things, and undoing actions. Let's start with verbs meaning to make like new. Renew, restore, refresh, renovate, and rejuvenate.
Okay. Renew implies so extensive a remaking or replacing that what was faded or disintegrated now seems like new. It's a thorough overhaul, replacement, or revitalization process that makes something appear and function as if it were new again. The source gives efforts to renew a failing marriage, suggesting a significant effort to make it strong and vibrant again. Its antonym is wear out.
So renew is a thorough overhaul to make like new. What about restore?
Restore implies a return to an original or perfect state after damage, depletion, or loss. It's about bringing something back to its previous good or undamaged condition. The source gives restored a fine piece of furniture, meaning it was brought back to its original fine condition.
So restore is bringing back to the original good state. How does refresh compare?
Refresh implies the supplying of something necessary to restore lost strength, animation, or power. It's about invigorating, re-energizing, or livening up something or someone that has become tired, stale, or depleted.
Right.
The source gives lunch refreshed my energy, meaning it restored his lost energy. Antonyms are jade and addle.
So refresh is about invigorating or re-energizing.
Mm.
And renovate.
Renovate suggests a renewing by cleansing, repairing, or rebuilding. It's specifically about improving something old, especially a building or room, through structural repair, cleaning, and updating to make it seem new or better. The source gives the apartment has been entirely renovated.
So renovate is improving by repairing and cleaning, often buildings. Finally, rejuvenate.
Rejuvenate suggests the restoration of youthful vigor, powers, and appearance. It's about making something feel young, energetic, or vibrant again, applying to people, spirits, organizations, or things metaphorically. The source gives the change in jobs rejuvenated her spirits, making her feel energetic and youthful in spirit again.
So rejuvenate is making something feel young or energetic again. So we have thorough overhaul, renew, returning to original state, restore, invigorating, energizing, refresh, improving by repair, cleaning, renovate, and restoring youthful vigor, rejuvenate. Why do we need all these variations?
These verbs describe different processes and goals in making something like new or better. They allow you to specify whether the process is a complete overhaul, bringing back to an original state, simply re-energizing, improving through physical repair, or restoring youthful vitality.
Closely related to making like new is bringing something back to life or consciousness. Websters provides another set of verbs. Restore, verb, again, revive, revivify, and resuscitate, meaning to regain or cause to regain signs of life and vigor. Restore again? What's the sense here?
Right. Restore here implies a return to consciousness, health, or vigor, often by use of remedies or treatments. It's bringing someone back to a state of health or consciousness after illness, injury, or depletion, often through medical or therapeutic means. The source gives hearing can sometimes be restored by surgery, meaning brought back to a functional state.
So restore is bringing back to health, consciousness, or function, often medically. What about revive?
Revive may imply recovery from a death-like state, like a stupor or faint, but is widely applicable to restoration to a flourishing state. It's about bringing something back from a low point, decline, or near lifelessness to life, health, or a flourishing state, whether a person, a plant, or an idea. The source gives the showers revived withering crops.
So revive is bringing back from a low point to life or a flourishing state. How does revivify compare?
Revivify tends to suggest adding of new life and carries a weaker suggestion than revive of prior depletion. It's about injecting new energy, vitality, or spirit into something, making it more lively or animated, even if it wasn't completely depleted before. The source gives a good night's sleep revivifies the strongest person, meaning it adds new life and energy.
So revivify is injecting new life or energy. And resuscitate.
Resuscitate distinctively implies regaining vitality by arduous efforts to overcome a serious impairment, like artificial respiration for a nearly drowned person. And it can suggest a restoring to vitality where life seems nearly or wholly extinct. It's about bringing back from near death or complete inactivity through strenuous or specific efforts, or bringing renewed life to something that was almost completely gone.
Okay.
The source gives resuscitate old interest in sports.
So resuscitate is bringing back from near death or complete inactivity, often with great effort. So we have bringing back to health function, restore, bringing back from a low point to a flourishing state, revive, injecting new life energy, revivify, and strenuous efforts from near death or complete inactivity, resuscitate. Why differentiate these terms for bringing back to life?
These verbs specify different degrees and types of bringing back to life or vigor, highlighting the state of the thing being brought back, depleted, near death, simply needing energy, and the nature of the effort involved. Medical treatment, general process, injection of energy, strenuous effort.
Beyond making things new or bringing them back, sometimes we just need to put something else in place of what was there before. Webster's gives us words meaning to put someone or something out of a place or into the place of another. Replace, displace, supplant, and supersede. Replace is a very common verb.
It is. Replace implies a filling of a place once occupied by something lost, destroyed, or no longer usable or adequate. It's about substitution when the original is gone or insufficient. The source gives, the broken window will have to be replaced.
So replace is substituting something gone or inadequate with something else. What about displace?
Displace implies a moving or forcing out of a place, often preceding a replacement. It's about the act of removing something from its location or position, often due to external force or change. The source gives thousands displaced by floods, meaning they were forced out of their homes.
So displace is forcing something out of its place. How does supplant compare?
Supplant implies either a dispossessing or usurping of another's place or privileges, or an uprooting of something and its replacement with something else. It suggests taking over someone else's position, role, or place, often by force, strategy, or undermining them. The source gives, discovered he had been supplanted in her affections, meaning someone else had taken his place through some means.
So supplant implies taking over someone else's place, often through strategic or forceful means. And supersede.
Supersede implies the replacing of a person or thing that has become superannuated, obsolete, or otherwise inferior. It's replacing something specifically because it's old, outdated, or no longer good enough, implying the new thing is superior. The source gives, the new edition supersedes all previous ones, meaning the new edition replaces the old because it's better or more current.
So supersede is replacing something because it's obsolete or inferior. So we have simple substitution for something gone inadequate, replace, forcing something out of place, displace, taking over someone else's place by force of strategy, supplant, and replacing something obsolete inferior with something superior, superseded. Why use these different words?
These verbs describe different scenarios and reasons for one thing taking the place of another. They allow you to specify whether it's a simple swap, a forceful removal, a strategic takeover, or a replacement due to obsolescence or inferiority.
Finally, in this cluster of undoing, sometimes we need to undo not just a physical thing, but an action or a decision. Webster's gives us verbs meaning to undo something previously done. Revoke, reverse, in a legal, non-judicial sense, repeal, rescind, and recall. Revoke sounds like canceling something official.
It does. Revoke implies a calling back that annuls or abrogates what was previously done, granted, or issued. It's canceling something by calling it back or withdrawing it. The source gives, had his license revoked, meaning the issuing authority canceled his license.
So revoke is canceling something granted or issued by calling it back. What about reverse in this sense?
Reverse usually applies specifically to a high court's action overthrowing a law, decree, or court decision, or to upsetting non-judicial actions or judgments. It's overturning a formal ruling, decision, or action, often by a higher authority or through a process of challenge. The source gives, the Court of Appeals reversed the opinion and convinced the umpire to reverse his decision.
So reverse is overturning a formal ruling or decision, often by an authority. How does repeal compare?
Repeal usually implies revocation of a law or ordinance by the legislative body that made it. It's the specific act of a legislature canceling a law they previously enacted. The source gives, repealed the parking ban.
So repeal is legislative cancellation of a law. And rescind.
Rescind implies the exercise of proper authority in abolishing or making void. It's voiding, canceling, or annulling something by official authority, often a contract, agreement, or decision. The source gives, rescinded their earlier decision in a new vote, meaning the authority officially made the previous decision void.
So rescind is voiding something by official authority. Finally, recall.
Recall, a less technical term, can replace any of the others in informal contexts. But in this group of formal undoing, it can mean to officially call back something issued or done. The source gives recall a bid in bridge, which is less formal than revoking a license, but still an undoing of a previous action. It's a more general term for taking back or canceling.
So recall is a more general term for undoing or taking back something.
Hmm.
So we have canceling something, granted, revoke, overturning a formal ruling, reverse, legislative cancellation of a law, repeal, voiding by official authority, rescind, and a more general term for undoing, recall, come back. Why all these?
These verbs describe different ways of canceling or undoing something, varying in formality, the type of thing being undone, license, court decision, law, general decision, and the authority doing it. They provide precise terms for different forms of official or formal cancellation.
That's a detailed look at undoing actions and decisions. Changing things, whether replacing them or undoing them, often involves shifts in position or order. Websters gives us verbs meaning to change to the opposite position. Reverse, again, transpose, and invert.
Right. We've seen reverse in a few contexts now. Here, reverse may imply change in order, side, direction, or meaning. It's a general term for turning something around or opposite in some way, turning a car around, reversing a trend, reversing the order of names, or reversing one's opinion. The source gives reversed his position on the agreement.
So reverse is a general term for changing to the opposite order, direction, or meaning. What about transpose?
Transpose implies a change in order or relative position of units, often through exchange of position. It's specifically about switching the positions of two or more elements. The source gives anagrams formed by transposing letters, meaning the letters were switched around.
So transpose is switching positions. And invert.
Invert applies to a change from one side to another by turning upside down or inside out. It's specifically about turning something upside down or inside out. The source gives a typo consisting of inverted type where the letters are printed upside down.
So invert is turning upside down or inside out. So we have a general change to the opposite. Reverse, switching positions, transpose, and turning upside down, inside out, invert. Why distinguish these?
These specify how something is changed to the opposite. Is it a general turning around or a change in direction order? Is it specifically by swapping positions of elements? Or is it by turning something physically upside down or inside out? The specific verb clarifies the nature of the change.
That's helpful for describing specific kinds of physical or structural changes. Sometimes change isn't necessarily progress. It's a return to a previous state or simply happening repeatedly. This leads us to words about coming back and repetition. Let's start with verbs meaning to go or come back. Return, revert, recur, and recrude.
Okay. Return is the most general. It may imply going back to a starting place or source or to a former or proper place or condition. It's the basic act of going back to a previous location, state, or owner. The source gives return home to an enthusiastic welcome and return to a former state.
So return is the general term for going back to a place or state. What about revert?
Revert is likely to imply going back to a former, often a lower condition. This term often suggests a negative backward change, a regression. However, it can also apply to a returning after interruption. The source gives reverted to a less civilized state, highlighting the negative sense, and reverted to his first decision, meaning he came back to that decision after a period away from it.
So revert is often a negative backward step, or returning after an interruption. How does recur compare?
Recur implies a return, often repeated returns, of something that has happened or been experienced before. It's about something happening again, and often doing so repeatedly or regularly over time. The source gives suffered from recurring headaches.
So recur is about something happening again, often repeatedly. And recrudesce.
Recrudesce, yeah, this implies a returning to life or activity, especially if something that had subsided. This term often applies to something negative or undesirable, like a disease, conflict, or problem that returns with renewed vigor after a period of inactivity or decline. The source gives the epidemic recrudesced with renewed vigor.
So recrudesce is something often negative, returning to activity after subsiding. So we have general, returning to a play state, return, returning to a former, often lower condition, or after interruption, revert, repeated happening, recur, and return to activity after subsiding, often negative, recrudesce. Why distinguish these ways of coming back?
These verbs specify different types of coming back, highlighting the destination, place versus state, the quality of the change, neutral, negative, or interrupted, the frequency, single return versus repeated, and the prior state, active versus subsided. This allows for precise descriptions of different kinds of backward movement or repetition.
Building on the idea of repetition, let's look at verbs meaning to say or do again. Repeat, reiterate, and iterate. Repeat is the most basic term for doing something again.
It is. Repeat stresses the simple fact of uttering, presenting, or doing something again one or more times. It's the fundamental act of doing or saying something more than once. The source gives repeated the joke over and over.
So repeat is the general term for doing something again. What about reiterate?
Reiterate usually implies one repetition after another, especially if something that is said. It suggests emphasizing a point or idea by repeating it, often immediately or soon after the initial statement, for clarity or emphasis. The source gives reiterated her views at every opportunity.
So reiterate is emphatic verbal repetition, often for emphasis. And iterate.
Iterate means the same as reiterate, but is rarer and has a bookish feel. It's a less common, more formal or literary synonym for reiterating or repeating something, often an idea or theme. The source gives an ancient theme iterated by many authors.
So iterate is a formal or literary synonym for reiterate. So we have simple doing, again, repeat, emphatic verbal repetition, reiterate, and a more formal term for that, iterate. Why these distinctions?
These differentiate between simple repetition, the specific act of emphasizing something verbally by repeating it, and a more formal or literary way to describe that emphatic repetition.
That's a clear set for talking about doing things again. Thinking about patterns, whether repeated actions or things that come back, makes me think about patterns in sound. Websters gives us words for the more or less regular rise and fall in sound intensity, often in poetry or music, rhythm, meter, and cadence.
Right. Rhythm implies movement and flow, an agreeable succession of rising and falling sounds, and the recurrence at fairly regular intervals of a stress. It's the overall pattern and feel of movement and sound, the sense of beat and flow. The source gives moving gracefully to the rhythm.
So rhythm is the overall flow and pattern of sound. What about meter?
Meter implies the reduction of rhythm to system and measure and the establishment of a definite rhythmical pattern. It's the formal, measured structure of rhythm, often with specific units or feet, as in poetry or music theory. The source gives an epic in hendecasyllabic meter, referring to a specific, measured pattern of syllables and stresses.
So meter is the formal, measured structure of rhythm and cadence.
Cadence may be equivalent to rhythm or meter, or may stress variety in ordered sequence, often with falling or rising effects. It can refer to the overall flow or structure, but often specifically highlights the modulation, inflection, and the falling or rising shape of sounds, particularly at the end of phrases, sentences, or musical passages. The source gives the gentle cadence of the local dialect, referring to the rise and fall and flow of speech.
So cadence can be flow, structure, or specifically the modulation and rise-fall of sounds. So we have the overall feel of movement, rhythm, the strict measured structure, meter, and the modulation, rise, and fall of sounds, especially at endings, cadence. Why distinguish these terms for sound patterns?
These terms help describe the temporal and structural aspects of sound with precision. They differentiate between the general feel of movement, the strict measurement of pattern, and the melodic rise and fall that gives shape to phrases in speech, music, or poetry.
That's useful for describing music, poetry, and even how people talk. Moving from abstract patterns to concrete states, like the state of having great abundance. Webster's gives us words meaning having goods, property, and money in abundance. Rich, wealthy, affluent, and opulent.
Okay. Rich is the most general term. It implies having more than enough to gratify normal needs or desires. It's about possessing substantial resources beyond what is simply needed for comfort. The source gives one of the richest nations in the world. Its antonym is poor.
So rich is having more than enough resources. What about wealthy?
Wealthy stresses the abundant possession of property and intrinsically valuable things. It focuses specifically on having substantial assets, property, and valuable possessions beyond just liquid money. The source gives retired from politics, a wealthy man, implying he had accumulated significant assets. Its antonym is indigent.
So wealthy is about abundant assets and possessions. How does affluent compare?
Affluent suggests prosperity and increasing wealth. It implies not just having wealth, but experiencing ongoing financial growth, comfort, and a sense of flowing abundance. The source gives an affluent society, suggesting a society with widespread prosperity and comfort. Antonyms are impecunious and straitened.
So affluent implies ongoing prosperity and comfort.
And opulent Opulence suggests lavish expenditure and ostentatious display of great wealth. It implies not just having wealth, but spending it freely, often extravagantly, and visibly displaying that wealth. The source gives opulent mansions, referring to homes that show a lavish display of wealth. Antonyms are destitute and indigent.
So opulent is displaying great wealth lavishly. So we have having more than enough, rich, possessing abundant assets, wealthy, experiencing ongoing prosperity, affluent, and displaying wealth lavishly, opulent. Why these terms?
These terms distinguish different aspects and levels of abundance. They allow you to specify whether someone simply has more than enough, has significant assets, is experiencing ongoing prosperity, or is displaying their wealth in a lavish way.
That gives a nuanced scale of describing abundance. How people relate to others includes how they treat those less fortunate, but also how they interact in other ways, sometimes even making fun of others. Websters gives us verbs meaning to make an object of laughter of: ridicule, deride, mock, taunt, and twit.
Right. Ridicule implies a deliberate, often malicious belittling through laughter or scornful language. It's making fun of someone with the intent to demean, dismiss, or put them down. The source gives, consistently ridiculed everything she said.
So ridicule is malicious belittling through laughter or scorn. What about deride?
Deride suggests a contemptuous and often bitter ridiculing. It's ridiculing someone with intense scorn, contempt, and often bitterness. The source gives derided their efforts, implying they treated their efforts with scornful laughter.
So deride is scornful, bitter ridiculing. How does mock compare?
Mock implies a scornful deriding, often ironically expressed by mimicry or sham deference. It frequently involves imitating someone in a scornful way or using false respect to show contempt. The source gives, youngsters began to mock the old man, likely by imitating him scornfully.
So mock is scornful ridiculing, often with imitation or false deference.
And taunt.
Taunt suggests a jeeringly reproachful insult or derisive challenging.
It's provoking or challenging someone with insulting, often aggressive remarks, often to anger or upset them. The source gives, terrorists taunted the hostages, implying they used insulting remarks to provoke and torment.
So taunt is provoking with insulting, often aggressive remarks. Finally, twit.
Twit usually suggests mild or good-humored teasing. It's gentle, playful teasing without malicious intent, often done between friends or in a lighthearted way. The source gives, students twitted their teacher.
So twit is mild, good-humored teasing. So we have malicious belittling, ridicule, scornful ridiculing, deride, scornful ridiculing with mimicry, mock, provoking with insults, taunt, and mild teasing, twit. Why these distinctions?
These verbs describe different forms and intensities of making fun, highlighting the intent, malicious versus good-humored, the manner, laughter, scorn, mimicry, insults, and the relationship between the parties.
That's helpful for describing the tone and intent of making fun. Dealing with others often involves rules and expectations, sometimes applied with great strictness. Webster's gives us words meaning extremely severe or stern: rigid, rigorous, strict, and stringent.
Okay. Rigid implies uncompromising inflexibility. It suggests an inability or unwillingness to bend, change, or adapt, often applied to rules, standards, systems, or attitudes.
Right.
The source gives rigid admission standards. Its antonym is lax.
So rigid is uncompromisingly inflexible. What about rigorous?
Rigorous implies the imposition of hardship and difficulty. It suggests conditions, training, or standards that are challenging, demanding, and require significant effort or endurance. The source gives the rigorous training of recruits. Its antonym is mild.
So rigorous implies imposing hardship or difficulty, being very demanding. How does strict compare?
Strict emphasizes undeviating conformity to rules, standards, or requirements. It suggests demanding precise, unswerving adherence to rules or regulations with little allowance for deviation. The source gives a strict diet. Its antonym is lenient.
So strict demands precise adherence to rules. Finally, stringent.
Stringent suggests restrictions or limitations that curb or coerce. It implies tight controls, severe restrictions, or forceful limitations that limit freedom or options. The source gives, the judge's ruling is a stringent interpretation, meaning it applies very tight and limiting constraints on how the law is understood.
So stringent suggests tight restrictions or limitations that curb. So we have uncompromising inflexibility, rigid, imposing hardship difficulty, rigorous, demanding precise adherence to rules, strict, and enforcing tight restrictions, limitations, stringent. Why differentiate these?
These terms differentiate types of severity or sternness. Is it about absolute inflexibility, imposing challenging conditions, demanding precise adherence to rules? or enforcing tight, coercive restrictions. Each word provides a specific sense of the nature of the severity or sternness.
That clarifies different kinds of severity. Sometimes escaping strictness or rigidity or just moving generally involves upward movement. Let's look at different ways to move upward. Rise, arise, ascend, mount, and soar. They mean to move or come up from a lower to a higher level.
Okay. Rise is the most general term for upward movement. It's used for people or animals getting up, things appearing to lift themselves up, or fluid moving upward. It's a basic upward motion from a lower position. The source gives rise every morning, hills rising, and river rising. Antonyms are decline and set.
So rise is a general term for upward movement. What about a rise?
A rise is close to rise, but somewhat more rhetorical or poetic. It's a more formal, literary, or sometimes slightly more dramatic synonym for rising. The source gives arose slowly. Antonyms are recline and slump.
So a rise is a more formal or poetic way to say rise. How does ascend compare?
Ascend suggests a continuous or progressive upward movement or climbing. It implies a steady, often sustained climb upwards, whether physically or figuratively.
Right.
The source gives the sun ascends the sky. Its antonym is descend.
So ascend is steady upward climbing. And mount.
Mount, close to ascend, implies a gradual upward movement toward an even higher level or degree. It suggests increasing intensity, height, or significance over time, often steadily. The source gives felt her hopes mount, implying her hopes were steadily increasing to a higher level. Its antonym is drop.
So mount is gradual upward movement, often increasing intensity or degree. Finally, soar.
Soar usually connotes a continuous, often swift ascent into high altitudes, especially intellectually, spiritually, or aesthetically. It implies rapid, effortless seeming and high upward movement, often in abstract or aspirational contexts. The source gives the brilliant product of a soaring imagination, suggesting imagination moving quickly and effortlessly to great heights.
So soar is rapid, high, often abstract upward movement. So you have general upward movement, rise, poetic formal rising and rise, steady climbing ascend, gradual increase upward movement, mount, and rapid, high, often abstract ascent, soar. Why these differences?
These verbs describe upward movement with different emphasis, highlighting the manner, general, poetic, steady, gradual, swift, effortless, the destination, general, higher level, high altitudes, and the context, physical, abstract, aspirational.
That's a great set for describing different kinds of upward movement, literal or figurative. Thinking about strictness, sometimes the opposite of that, or urban complexity, might be the quiet charm of the countryside. Let's talk about words relating to or characteristic of the country. Rural, rustic, pastoral, and bucolic.
Right. Rural is the most general term. It suggests open country and farming. It's used to describe areas outside of cities and towns, often associated with agriculture. The source gives a diminishing rural portion of the island. Antonyms are urban and citified.
So rural is the general term for country areas, often agricultural. What about rustic?
Rustic suggests a contrast with city life and connotes rudeness and lack of polish. It refers to things that are simple, unsophisticated, or charmingly plain, often associated with the country lifestyle or handcrafted items. The source gives rustic furniture, suggesting simple, unpolished, country-style furniture.
So rustic is the simple, unpolished style or character of the country. How does pastoral compare?
Pastoral implies an idealized simplicity and peacefulness and apartness from the world. It evokes a romanticized view of country life, often associated with shepherds, idyllic landscapes, and tranquility, separate from the stresses of urban life. The source gives the pastoral setting of a resort.
So pastoral is an idealized, peaceful view of country life. Finally, bucolic.
Bucolic may refer to either the charming and desirable or the undesirable aspects of country life. It captures the mixed reality of country living, which can be idyllic and simple, but also potentially rough, isolated, or monotonous. The source gives imagining bucolic bliss, focusing on the charm, or trapped in a bucolic nightmare, focusing on the less desirable aspects.
So bucolic can describe both the good and bad sides of country life. So we have the general term for country areas, rural, the simple and polished style, rustic, the idealized tranquil view, pastoral, and the mixed reality, good and bad, of country life, bucolic. Why these terms?
These terms allow you to specify what aspect of country life you are describing. Are you simply referring to the geographic area, the simple style, the idealized peacefulness, or the complex reality that includes both charm and difficulty?
Finally, our last group of words brings us to concepts of protection and respect, focusing on things deemed necessary or sacred. Let's look at words meaning protected by law, custom, or respect against abuse. Sacred, sacrosanct, inviolate, and inviolable. And then words for things deemed necessary. Requirement, requisite, and prerequisite. Sacred is a powerful word.
It is. Sacred implies either a setting apart for a special use or a special quality leading to almost religious reverence. It describes something set aside for religious purposes or something treated with deep reverence and respect, often with a spiritual or profound emotional quality. The source gives chair sacred to father, meaning set apart and revered, and a sacred memory, meaning treated with deep, almost religious reverence.
So sacred is set apart or revered, often with religious feeling. What about sacrosanct?
Sacrosanct, in general use, may retain its implication of the utmost of sacredness, meaning extremely holy or inviolable. However, it can also take an ironic quality, suggesting supposed rather than real sacredness, used to mock something claimed to be untouchable but which perhaps isn't or shouldn't be.
Right.
The source gives public figures were sacrosanct, maybe they shouldn't be, using the ironic sense.
So sacrosanct is either extremely sacred or mockingly referred to as such. How does inviolate compare?
Inviolate applies to things like laws, agreements, institutions, or persons which for some reason are secure from abuse or injury, stressing the fact of not having been violated. It emphasizes the state of being unbroken, unharmed, or undisturbed despite potential threats. The source gives the inviolate beauty of the wilderness, meaning its beauty remains undisturbed and unharmed. Its antonym is violated.
So inviolate is the state of not having been broken or harmed. And inviolable.
Inviolable, while close to inviolate, implies a character that is secure from violation. It emphasizes the inherent quality, principle, or right that makes it impossible, wrong, or forbidden to violate it. The source gives the inviolable sanctity of the law, meaning the law has an inherent quality that makes it impossible or wrong to break.
So inviolable is having an inherent quality that prevents violation. So we have set apart, revered, sacred, extremely sacred, or ironically so, sacrosanct, the state of not being violated, inviolate, and having an inherent quality preventing violation, inviolable. Why distinguish these terms?
These terms differentiate types of protection or reverence, highlighting whether something is set apart and revered, considered supremely sacred, or ironically treated as such, is currently in an unbroken state, or possesses an inherent quality that makes it impossible or wrong to violate.
Finally, let's look at things deemed necessary. Requirement, requisite, and prerequisite. These mean something regarded as necessary for success or perfection. Requirement seems like a rule or demand.
Yes. Requirement may imply something more or less arbitrarily demanded, especially by those with a right to lay down conditions. It's something mandated or stipulated by an authority, rule, or condition setter. The source gives college entrance requirements.
So requirement is something demanded by authority or a rule. What about requisite?
Requisite implies something indispensable for the end in view or otherwise essential and not arbitrarily demanded. It's a necessary component, quality, or element that is fundamental and essential for achieving a specific purpose or end, not just a rule someone made up. The source gives education is a prime requisite of a free society.
So requisite is an essential, indispensable component for a purpose, and prerequisite.
Prerequisite applies to a requisite that must be available in advance or acquired as a preliminary. It's something specifically needed beforehand, a condition that must be met or obtained before something else can happen or be done. The source gives a chemistry course that was a prerequisite to further study.
So prerequisite is something needed beforehand, a prior condition. So we have something demanded by rule, requirement, an essential, indispensable component, requisite, and something needed beforehand, prerequisite. Why distinguish these levels of necessity?
These terms specify the nature and timing of necessity. Is it a rule or demand? Is it an essential component, or is it something specifically required in advance? Each word provides a specific context for why something is considered necessary.
Wow, that was a truly deep dive, wasn't it? We've journeyed from the randomness of chance through describing space, managing resources, how our minds work, damage and ruin, effort and striving, skill, truth, collecting information, reactions to discomfort, communicating in various ways, holding ourselves back, relating to others, giving things up, making things new, changing positions, coming back, the patterns of sound, abundance, making fun, strictness, lack of smoothness, the countryside, and finally, what we deem necessary and sacred.
We have. We've seen how subtle differences in word choice, even among apparent synonyms, can dramatically change meaning, connotation, and the specific picture you paint for your listener or reader.
And understanding these nuances isn't just for writers or linguists tucked away in libraries, is it? It's incredibly practical.
Not at all.
It helps you communicate more precisely and effectively in your own life, understand information more accurately when you hear or read it, and truly appreciate the richness and power of language in everyday life. Whether you're reading a report, having a crucial conversation, or just observing the world around you.
Exactly. Paying attention to these distinctions sharpens your comprehension and your ability to express yourself with clarity, impact, and nuance. It allows you to say precisely what you mean and understand precisely what others mean.
So here's a thought to leave you with as you go about your day. Consider how often we might use these similar words interchangeably in our own speech or writing. What's subtle but significant information or feeling might we miss or misunderstand when we don't pay attention to these differences or when others don't?
Good question.
How might simply noticing these distinctions change the way you listen, read, or speak today? Keep an ear out for these words and try to identify which specific sense is being used.
Until the next deep dive into what makes us well-informed.